So good evening, thanks for coming, and we welcome to Ottawa the four researchers here. They came from York University, and they will talk to us about their research project on the Greek Canadian archives, which is funded by the Hellenic Heritage Foundation, which is a great foundation. I'm very impressed with the Hellenic Foundation. They promote Greek language, Greek culture. They have trips abroad. They have these great podcasts in English. They did one for 1821, the revolution. They did one for 1922, the destruction of Smyrna and Asia Minor, and another one about the Polytechnic School. But anyway, so it's a great association. So I'm not going to tire you. So we have here Vasilis Molos, Dr. Vasilis Molos, who is an associate professor of history and Hellenic Heritage Foundation Chair of Modern Greek History. We have Parnassos Gekas. He's an associate professor of history and Hellenic. I mixed it up there, right? Okay. So I'm starting again. So Dr. Vasilis Molos is director and research lead of the project Hellenic Heritage Foundation Greek Canadian Archives. And Parnassos Gekas is the associate professor of history and Hellenic Heritage Foundation Chair of Modern Greek History. We have Alexandros Balasis and Angelos Laskaris, and they're both PhD students. I suppose in the history department, both in the history department, York department. So I am going to sit down and I'm going to pass the microphone. So we don't have to.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ όλους. Πρώτα απ' όλα την ευχαριστή και τη Σότη για την πρόσκληση. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που είστε εδώ σήμερα. Είναι μεγάλη μας χαρά και τιμή, γιατί είναι πρώτη φορά που ερχόμαστε στην Οτάβα και στα αρχεία. Thank you all very much for being here. First of all, I'm the chair. I have the honor to be the chair of the Hellenic Heritage Foundation at York University in Modern Greek History. And the presentation today has two main aims. First of all, to let you know about what we're doing and what we've been working on, and we plan to work on for the next 2-3 years at least. Building an archive and the research around it and making this as much known as possible. And secondly, that's why we're here, otherwise we would have just stayed in the archives and then in our hotel, to invite you to consider participating in the project. Because that's one of the reasons why we're doing this, because this is a community, or as we call it, it's a public history project. But it's also digital, as Bill will tell you in a minute. So first, I want to follow up from what Efkaris said, that the Hellenic Heritage Foundation is a charitable foundation that was brought together, that it was created when people who are in the GTA, mainly in Toronto, came together and decided to create the conditions for a program in Hellenic Studies at York University. So the chair ended up in the history department, and from then on, from 2000 onwards, everyone who holds a chair is a historian in modern Greek history, modern Greek and contemporary history. Practically, that means in the ways we teach modern contemporary history, 1800 onwards. Let's say pre-Greek Revolution, the creation of the Greek state, all the way to the present. And the present, of course, includes the history of Greeks in Canada. So when I arrived in 2010 at York, I met the then graduate student Chris Grafos, who was just starting his research, his PhD dissertation research in the history of Greeks in Canada. And he told me, good, great you're here, because I'm trying to do a PhD on the Greeks in Canada, and there's nothing. There's no archive, there's nothing, really. I told him, okay, I'm not sure I can help, because I'm a historian of the 19th century Ionian Islands during the period of British rule, in the 19th century when the Ionian Islands were a protectorate, before Enosis, before unification with Greece. So I told him, I can tell you a few things about the 1960s and 70s, which is when most Greeks came here, as you very well know, but I don't think I can help you very much. He said, okay, let's try. And I followed, and he created, with my support and the institutional support of York, very limited back then, very small, the Greek Canadian History Project. The way we started this was because at York there is a sort of a constellation, let's say, of other programs. There's a Portuguese Canadian history project that had just started a couple of years before that. Then there's the Italian Canadian history chair. So we associated, we followed models, and we got inspired by what other people, especially in the case of the Portuguese Canadian graduate student then, Gilberto Fernandes, what they were doing. So over time, this grew steadily but slowly, I would say, until in 2017, with a generous donation of the Niarchos Foundation, some colleagues from University of McGill, Stavros Anastasiadis, Panos Papas from Vancouver, and Professor Riley from the University of Patras, we did a lot of interviews, audio interviews only, and we created a virtual museum, as we call it, on the history of Greek migration to Canada. It's called immigreg.com. That's where it lives. That's where you can visit it. And it's a standard sort of virtual museum. So you click, then you go into different rooms, and then you experience, let's say, you get a sense of how was it, the journey, the settlement in Canada, labor relations, community. Many of the things you know, but you haven't really seen. It's probably also it's in Greek, English, and French, if I remember right. And it is also the first a major project on a major study, let's say, on Greeks Canada through interviews. But something was missing, and especially among many several things were missing. But one of them was having people to actually watch them to tell the story. So ever since we did that, I was thinking we should have interviewed people on camera, on video, because you know how much more impactful, how much more powerful is watching someone to tell the story. So that's what we're doing now, among other things. First of all, we interview people on video, but especially we have the vision to make this as open and accessible as possible. So that's why it is a public digital project. It is a history of Greeks in Canada since they started, and since they started coming to this country. And by this, that's where I'm going to conclude, is where my interest is. So we have sort of divided, but not sort of evenly, and we also try to overlap, because that's how we work as a team. We've divided, let's say, I'm looking at the early, so to speak, history of Greeks in Canada, late 19th century, all the way to the 1940s. This is our sort of dividing line, or let's say time limit, let's say, for this early period, so to speak. And we're looking at newspapers that are now many digitized. We're also seeking to collect material. We're looking forward to Michalis Mouratiris, for instance, as some of you may know, donating his very impressive collection of sources to New York University and to archives, and to our Canadian archives, which of course will enrich even further what we already have. So we're looking at different sources, like the 1921, 1931 census, which will give us, now it's down to individualized records. So we know who came, from where, what was their names, who they married, how many kids they had, where did they live, even how much money they made, and what they were doing for work. Because now these records are accessible. Until recently, we only knew, for instance, that in 1921, the census gives you around 5,000 Greeks in Canada. Well, there were probably more. But now we know exactly what they were doing and where they lived and when did they come from Greece or elsewhere. Because up until 1919, 1920, Greeks still come from the Ottoman Empire. And their story is less well known. Of course, it's known to those sort of early Greek Canadians, but not as known to the vast majority of Greeks who came and their descendants who came in the 1950s and 60s. So that's what I would like to start with, give you a sense of what we're doing. And I think Vasilis now is going to give you sort of a more specific view of the archives online.
I'm Bill Molos. I'm the director and research lead of the. Pardon me. Sorry, I'm the director and research lead of the Greek Canadian Archives. I'm a first generation Greek Canadian. My parents immigrated in the 60s and 70s. I grew up in Toronto, but then I left for graduate school and for work for 15 years. And during that time, I had the pleasure to meet Chris Gekas, who Sakis mentioned, and Sakis himself, and to watch from afar what they were doing with the Greek Canadian History Project. And so when the opportunity arose and the HHF Greek Canadian Archives was funded and they were looking for a director, I applied. And I returned to Toronto, I returned to Canada, and we took on this project. The Greek Canadian History Project, I think, was a tremendous success. I think they did a great job of outreach. I think that there was great collaboration with immigrant, as Sakis was saying. But the HHF Greek Canadian Archives has morphed into its own individual entity, and it's one that you can kind of follow through our social media or on our website. So our website, which I'm going to show you, is hhfgca.ca. And I'm just going to walk you through a couple of things so that you have a sense for what we've been doing over the last year and a half or so. So here's our main page, and you can kind of scroll down and you can see some of the recent updates and commentary. You can see Angelo's picture here. Angelo wrote a piece called "Whose Are You? Dinos Isasi" about the Greek community of Toronto and internal politics. And you can find several of these articles on what we call Ipletia. So click on Ipletia, and I'll give you a sense for what it does and what it looks like. And you can see that there are several different articles about different topics. Some are about contemporary issues in Greece. Some of them deal with Greek politics and the elections and the events of the past year. Others deal with local histories that we're uncovering in the process of conducting some of the oral history interviews, as Sakis mentioned. Some deal with more questions of identity and diaspora. Some deal with recent innovations like Hellenic Heritage Month, which was introduced during the pandemic by the Ontario government. And I think as communities, we're still trying to grapple with what it is, what we want to showcase, what it is that we want to highlight that's different from what we've been highlighting in the past. Ipletia is a place for community to share these ideas. So if anyone has something to say about the community in Ottawa or the Greek Canadian community more broadly, please email me. We're happy to offer some copy editing support as well. We advertise all these things, as I mentioned, on our social media. We are a physical archive, and you can see our collections on the collections page. This is updated regularly. We're regularly adding research aids as well. So if you're a researcher, if you're no researcher, you can come on, you can click on some of these links, and it'll direct you to a page on the library that's been curated by our dedicated full-time archivist, Maria Parnassos. So we do have a full-time archivist who started a few weeks ago and is helping us to catalog all of the donations that we're receiving. So you can scroll down, get a sense. Some of them are Greek Community of Toronto documents. Some of them are books as well that were donated by our late but esteemed colleague, Michaeli Vitopoulo. We have several, I think it's about
more than 2,000 books.
2,000 books. So we're in the process. I think we've cataloged 400 of them so far, and these are available in special collections at York University for researchers and students. We have digitized collections. So digitized collections, we're in the process of making these more available and making them more accessible directly through our website. But for now, they're available on the Clara Thomas Archives and Special Collections website. I'll show you a couple so you get a sense of what's available. Here we have the Kefalonian Ithaca Association of Toronto Fonds. We have various records there. Our most well-known collection is probably the George Papadatos Fonds, which are quite interesting because they give you a sense of some of the cultural activities that were taking place in Toronto during the 60s and 70s, as well as some of the political activities surrounding some of the anti-junta movements. So you can go in here and you can get a better sense of what's available. We also have audio recordings and some video recordings from the coffee house, from the Boite scene on the Danforth, the Trojan Horse in particular, where George Papadatos was one of the owners. One of the things that you can see here is we have several WAV files. We have several audio recordings, and these are of community events that were taking place in the 60s, 70s, up to the early 1980s. There are also recordings from various concerts. So we had various concerts that took place in Toronto and elsewhere. We had Leonidas arrive. We had Mikis Theodorakis come to Toronto. And these things were recorded as well, which is, it's wonderful that these things were preserved, and it's wonderful that we can digitize these things and preserve them in another place. We can scroll down and we can see some pictures as well. I mean, we've done a good job of digitizing, as you can see. So we have a lot of the audio files first, but we can go forward a little bit and we can see some of the other pictures that exist here. This picture that you can see that's associated with the font, this is taken outside the Trojan Horse, that coffee house that I was telling you about, where they recited the poetry of Elitis. They did various concerts as well, various musical performances here as well. And you can see here's a commemoration of the Politechnio. You can see that it says Psomi Pedia Eleftheria on the banner that's on the middle picture. You can see some more banal moments as well too. So this is something that I think is interesting for historians. I mean, sometimes you read something that someone's written, you read a pamphlet or something, but you go on here and you see these pictures of these individuals in their day-to-day lives. You get a sense of the networks that they were involved in as well. And all this stuff is becoming more and more available on the special collections page. What I'm most proud of is our work on the digital portal, and this directly connects to Sakis' Shirk-funded project, the Greeks in Canada. And the main aim of the Greeks in Canada is to look at the older members of our community and to preserve as best we can their memories. If you go on our website, it says that we're looking explicitly for people who immigrated in the 50s and 60s. One of the things that's been a great revelation is that we have older members of our community as well who immigrated earlier, or the descendants of that first wave of immigrants. So again, if there's someone in the community who has a story that you think we absolutely need to preserve, please let us know after our presentation, after the Q&A. We'd love to take their name down. We'd love to meet with them, and we'd love to preserve their memories as well. It's not just that we're posting these videos of these interviews on their own. We're also trying to organize these things thematically so that they're more accessible. So we organize them by various activities. So some of them deal with a question, obviously, of migration. So if you're only interested as a researcher in question of migration, or if you're just sort of interested in knowing a little bit more about your family history, more interested in understanding the community history, these different migration routes, you can just click on migration. And so all of these videos touch on, in one way or another, migration. If you click on another video here, you can see what we've done is we've organized these things, including various details about the individual, their name, who the interviewers. You can see Angelo interviewed Georgiana Fotistos here. We have date, location, the language that's spoken. We have a permalink tab here because these things are ultimately going to live on York University servers. So we're in the process of uploading these videos there in order to have backup, in order to have more redundancies in place, and in order to establish this as a permanent system. And again, we have a project because there are various projects that are also contained within the digital portal. We have the Greeks in Canada that we mentioned, but we also have Angelo's dissertation project, which is known as Childhood Narratives of Greek Canadians from the 1940s. And if we go back here, I can show you some other projects that the Greek Canadian Archives is supporting. So our main research endeavor is the Greeks in Canada. You can see, I mentioned to you, Childhood Narratives of Greek Canadians in the 1940s. We also have various digital public history projects like Greek Canadian business histories. This is something that's underway right now. We're in the process of looking through advertisements initially that are available in various Greek newspapers, creating a data set, but in the next month or two, we're going to start to reach out to communities. So if you, your parents, your grandparents, perhaps, they had a Greek Canadian business, there's going to be a space for you to input information about them, telling us specifically what the address was, what the name was, who the proprietor was. And with that information, we'll be able to sort of locate it on this sort of large, freely available resource that's going to be housed directly on our website. You can see there are other projects that we're looking at as well. One that I want to highlight is the Film as Mediator project. This is the project of another one of our researchers who's in the Film and Media program at York University, and it focuses on cultivating a Cypriot Canadian community audiovisual media archive. It focuses on the history of Cypriot Canadians as part of our larger Greek Canadian archive. We mentioned the need to record and preserve the memories of Ottoman Greeks. We also need to preserve the memories of Cypriot Greeks and other communities as well. So this is one of the projects that does that. Going back to the digital portal, we can see that we have various interviews here. Again, this is only available at this point for researchers and students. We are making other things available on our social media, depending on the consent that's offered from the participant. But I do want to give you a sense for some of the amazing finds that we've been able to make through this project. And I want to highlight in particular one individual. Her name is Kulalakas. You remember her birthday was 35?
She was born in February. She just turned 98.
She's not 98
She
years
was born in 1926.
and born in Canada as well. So her parents were immigrants. So these are some of the stories that we've been able to collect. And I do want to highlight one passage here where she talks about her experience of Greeks contending with discrimination during the 30s and 40s, what she can remember. So let me play a clip for you so you can get a sense for what these interviews look like.
People ever call you that? All your brothers?
Oh, my son, Tasso, Tasso, he was called a greasy Greek
Full screen.
by a doctor's son. And Mr. Franco, he got my Tasso by the ears, he ripped his ears. And at that time, I was president of the Holy School. And I went to Mr. Bradman. I said to him, you know, if it wasn't because I knew you, I said I would have gone straight to the Board of Education. He says, you should have come to me. I said, you wouldn't have done anything for me because he was a doctor's son. And he just looked at me.
Did your father experience any ethnic prejudice in the city?
I don't think not that I was aware of. He was a very well-liked man. But I'll tell you that next to our restaurant was a shoe store. And I can remember this woman, Miss Russell. And I was talking something confidential, and I was talking to my father in Greek. And she stopped me. She says, you don't talk Greek. She says, you talk Canadian. She says, you must be talking about me. And I said, no, I wasn't. I was talking something about personal. Don't you ever talk Greek? She says, in front of somebody else.
How did you feel about that?
I felt terrible. But yeah, I guess she was right. Maybe she did. Because I've corrected, even in my day, I went to a hairdresser's and they were talking a different language, the two girls. And I said to them, don't do that. I said, because your customer will think you're talking about them. And I said, you can. So what goes around came around. I even used it, and I was quite surprised to myself.
I think that's a wonderful story because it gives you a sense of, again, the differences from waves of immigrants and how they dealt with some of the issues, but also it gives you a different sense for the context that they lived in. So I'll stop there. I'll hand it over to Angelo, and he'll tell you a little bit more about his role in the project.
Can we put my project screen?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Kalispera sas. Thank you for the kind invitation to present my research here this evening. My name is Angelo Lascaris, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student studying history at York University, as well as a research assistant for the Greek Canadian Archives. As a third-generation Greek Canadian, the city of Ottawa and its vibrant Greek community has had a very important place in my family's roots and history here in Canada. At 16, my grandmother left Greece in hopes of not only a better life for herself, but to support her family back home. She established herself here in Ottawa with her older sister and brother-in-law. Some of you may remember the restaurant called the famous Greek Souvlaki House on Riverside. that was owned and operated by relatives of ours, specifically the Kachulis family,
That's right.
who had it in the early in
Gina, Peter.
Gina Peter. They're my Spears, my uncle. So it's good to be back.
They're like, bye.
So that's good. So Canada, with its values of freedom and diversity, along with Ottawa's opportunities of growth and fulfillment, allowed many Greeks like yourselves here in this beautiful yet cold city many opportunities. This is one of the many mandates of the archives and our main goal. It's to document all your opportunities, your triumphs, and your contributions to Canadian society. I hope after today, you take what we have presented into consideration and to allow us the opportunity to document your stories, as each story is unique and priceless. Now with my dissertation, can we scroll down, Bill, just a bit? Thank you. So the project is titled Childhood Narratives of Greek Canadians from the 1940s, Trauma and Resilience. I have been analyzing the life histories of Greek Canadians who were born in Greece during the mid to late 1920s and 1930s to document their experiences living under Italian, Bulgarian, and Nazi occupations, as well as the resistance of the Second World War and later the Greek Civil War, all of which occurred in the span of 10 years. The Greek 1940s are known to be distinctive, if not unique, as you have experiences yourselves, heard, or have read. No other European country experienced such a dramatic sequence of events. Arguably, the decade of the 1940s can be depicted as one of the most, if not the deadliest decades in the history of the modern Greek state. As you see on the TV, participants of this project would have been children, adolescents, or teenagers during this decade, and later have migrated to Canada in the 50s to 1970s. I have 3 pictures on the screen. On the left is Mr. Theodore Trakas, who is the oldest participant of the study. I interviewed him at 100 years old. In the middle is Maria Vrenzos at a young age in Crete. So that's exactly her depicted in the picture. And on the right is the Siligardakis family, who unfortunately, their father was executed by the Nazis in 1943 in Crete. And I interviewed Emmanuel, who is the young boy in the top right corner. By conducting these oral history interviews, I'm able to unravel and question specifically how did trauma caused by war affect these individuals. Consequences such as unwarranted death, famine, sickness, division of families, and senseless murders were day-to-day obstacles for the majority. I seek to discover how did all of these challenges affect these children of the 1940s. I question, did they have a lost childhood, resulting in them to mature right before their time in order to survive? Only recently has the history of Greece during the 1940s focused on this appeal of researchers to question these issues of collective memory and reconciliation in the post-war environment. Incorporating my own research on Greek Canadians adds a transnational perspective, which aids in demonstrating how memories and ethnic identities can expand beyond borders to create a community of those who may share the same experiences, traumas, and identities. Lastly, it's important to stress how valuable this research is and how fortunate I am as a researcher to be able to meet people, have them open their homes to me, and most importantly, document their lived experiences. Interviews last from 1 hour to 3 hours, and as a caretaker to this information, it's a duty to not only document, but also present and preserve this research. It's one thing to interview and ask questions. and it's another to see the emotion and pain from the eyes of these individuals as they recount their memories. With the consent of the participants, their interviews will be deposited into the HHF Greek Canadian archives in perpetuity, leaving a lasting legacy. I had the great pleasure to interview this morning Mr. George Pitsikoulis. His life story of not just growing up in Greece, but also his contribution as a Greek in Canada to Parnassos and other involvements will be preserved in perpetuity at the archive as well. So I thank you, Mr. Pitsikoulis.
Thank you.
I want to quickly show a video of an interview, if that's all right. Let's go to the forward. Let's do school. Let's do encounter with
Πεντάτες. Ήταν ο πατέρας μου, αλλά δεν ήταν τόσο στέλεχος. Δεν κατεβόταν γιατί και ο φαρμακοποιός που ήταν στο χωριό μας ήταν πιο οργανωτής ακόμα. Δεν τον πειράξανε. Γιατί ήσαν αυτά τα τρία αδέρφια και το φυλάξαν το χωριό. Το χωριό μας. Δεν σκοπέσαν κανέναν. Όλα τα γύρω χωριά είχαν θύματα από τους αντάρτες. Σου είπα, στον Αγιο Βασίλη ήταν 23 άτομα. Χωριό μας δεν πειράσαν κανέναν. Εάν τα πειράζανε, ήταν φαρμακοποιός ο ένας, ο πατέρας μου, ξέραν ότι είχαν παραδείγματα τα όπλα και τα λοιπά και τα είχαμε δώσει εκεί στο κριτικό. Αλλά τελειώς θα τους λέω ότι χάρη του φαρμακοποιού και αυτόν που φοβόσανε τώρα. Προσεβότανε, γιατί χωριό ήταν, τώρα ήταν με τον άλλο, στο κάτω του ήταν και καπετάνιος αυτός ο ένας ο αδερφός. Καπετάν Τόμπρος. Και μπορεί να το περίμενε ότι κάτι θα γίνει. Και θυμάμαι και στο χωριό δεν χωράει γίνει αυτό. Κάτι είχε μια φασαρία. Είχε τον Τόμπρος τώρα με ένα άλογο, σαν μεγάλος αυτός. Και του λένε, τι πάει τον άνθρωπο, φάγανε μια γάλισσα, λέει, κάτι για μια γάλισσα φωναδά τώρα. Λέει, αν δεν είναι αυτός μόνο, είναι πολύ μέτζο, λέει, εδώ πέρα, λέει. Βουτιά στο αίμα θα κάνω εγώ από εσάς, λέει. Δηλαδή, θα σκοτώσει και μετά θα κάνει βουτιά στο αίμα. Αυτό το άκουσε. Εκεί. Γύρισε το άλογο και πήγε στο σπίτι του. Ήταν φρικιαστικό αυτό το αντάρτικο για τότε το κομμουνισμό. Δεν τον έχω πάει ποτέ.
And there's an English version of another interview that we can quickly show if we have time. Karayan at the bar. Karayan.
Μας και πήραν τη μάνα μου, η μάνα μας αυτό ξέρει, κρατούμενη, την βάλανε σε ένα άλλο σπίτι και της λέγανε θα πας να φέρεις τον άντρα σου. Μα πώς να τον φέρω, λέει η μάνα μου, δεν είναι η βαλίτσα να τον πάω να τον πάρω και να τον φέρω.
σου δίνουμε προθεσμία 1 μήνα να πας και να φέρεις τον άντρα σου. Αφήσανε τη μάνα μου τότε και ήρθε ξανά στο σπίτι. Εγώ ήμουν ο πιο μεγαλύτερος και μου είπε όλη την ιστορία αυτή. Και τώρα η μάνα μου άρχισε να καταστρώνει ένα σχέδιο πώς να φύγουμε από εκεί πέρα. Και συγκεκριμένα ένας μακρινός ξάδερφος της μάνας μου από το χωριό ήρθε και της είπε, η μάνα μου τη λέγανε Ελένη, Ελένη κοίταξε πάρε τα παιδιά και φύγει γιατί άμα σε πάρουν πάλι δεν θα γυρίσεις ζωντανή. Το άκουσε που μιλάγανε οι αντάρτες αυτοί μεταξύ τους. Λοιπόν, αυτό έκανε τη μάνα μου πιο έντονη στο να βρει έναν τρόπο διαφυγής. Και το χωριό μας είναι πάνω σε ένα οροπέδιο, κάτω είναι ένα μοναστήρι και δάσος. Το δάσος επεκτείνεται μέχρι τον κάμπο, που λέμε στην πεδιάδα του παιδιού. Εκεί πέρα στον κάμπο οι αντάρτες δεν είχαν έδαφος δικό τους. Πηγαίναν τη νύχτα, κάνανε καμιά επιδρομή και γυρίζανε πάλι. Παίρνανε τρόφιμα κυρίως. Η μάνα μου ήταν γνώστης της περιοχής, τα μονοπάτια, αυτά κλπ. Και τότε καλλιεργούσαμε καπνό. Εμείς είχαμε ένα χωράφι που το είχαμε καπνό κάτω από το χωριό, κοντά στο δάσος αυτό. Επάνω, στην άκρη του χωριού ήταν ένας μεγάλος λόφος. Εκεί πάντοτε οι αντάρτες είχαν παρατηρητήριο προς τον κάμπο, να μην έρθουν οι στρατιώτες, να μην έχουν, και ήταν πάντοτε ένας με τσάλια, ξέρετε, που κοίταζε. Εμείς λοιπόν, η μάνα μου, το βράδυ κατά στις πρωτού βασιλέψει ο ήλιος, πήρε εμάς τα 3 τα παιδιά και ένα γαϊδουράκι που είχαμε και πήρε το δρόμο, την κατεύθυνση ότι ανεβαίναμε στο χωριό. Αυτός μας έβλεπε από πάνω από εκεί, αλλά όταν μπήκαμε στο δάσος αυτό, αντί να πάρουμε την κατεύθυνση προς το χωριό, στρίψαμε δεξιά και πήγαμε μέσα στο δάσος. Το δάσος δεν μας έβλεπε, αλλά αυτός όταν είδε ότι φτάσαμε εκεί πέρα, νόμιζε ότι θα συνεχίσουμε να πάμε στο χωριό. Ίσως ησύχασε από εκεί πέρα. Λοιπόν, φτάσαμε στο δάσος με το γαϊδουράκι και τα 3 παιδιά από εμάς και ήταν σκοτάδι πλέον, ας πούμε. Δηλαδή έβλεπες το καλοκαίρι, τον Αύγουστο ήταν αυτό. Λοιπόν, μας έβαλε η μάνα σε κάτω από ένα δέντρο μέσα στο δάσος να κοιμηθούμε εκεί πέρα όλοι, διότι φοβόμασταν να κατέβουμε στον κάμπο που ήταν η περιοχή του στρατού κλπ. Διότι ο στρατός στην περιοχή εκείνη πολλές φορές έκανε.
So these are just a couple of examples of the interviews that we have conducted. If you happen to know of anybody or if you fit the criteria, I'll be happy to meet with them and yourselves to document your story. And I'd like to pass it on to my colleague, Alexandro, who works on specifically Greeks in Canada and immigration.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για τη φιλοξενία. Εγώ ονομάζομαι Alexandros Balassis. My name is Alexandros Balassis. I am born and raised in Thessaloniki, Greece. Thessaloniki is also where I studied history, where I did my undergrad and my MA studies. So when I came here in 2019, and I met for the first time Professor Sakis Gekas, he introduced me to a really interesting oral history archive in Greek. You have already heard that. So the Greek History Archive was a collection of migration histories of and experiences of people who arrived in Canada during the 1950s and 1960s. And for me, this was a completely new field. I had nobody in my family who migrated. I had no experience of migration myself, and also during our you have to be sure that during our school years in Greece and also during our university studies, there is little mention to migration. Maybe at particular universities, but not at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. So this archive fascinated me, and I decided to do a master thesis on migration, Greek migration in Canada. That's how I get interested with the history of migration, and that's how I got involved with conducting, actually not conducting, but working with oral histories. So what I want to share with you tonight is that it's so important to create an oral history archive, and especially an oral history archive of migrants. And the reason for that is that what we say in our history, what we say in history is that sometimes the archive talks, and also this is really important when the people of the archives talk. So keep in mind that by conducting interviews and recording experiences, we are able to do something that we call bottom-up history from below. Anyway, having heard these stories, having heard stories of and worked on stories of migrants in Canada, I realized that there is a broader story that needs to be told, and that story is the idea behind my dissertation, my PhD dissertation. So right now I am on my second year as a PhD student at York University, and I realized that there is a global history of Greek migration that needs to be told. So my project specifically focuses on Greek migration to Canada after the Second World War, but also Greek migration to Australia, because as many of you may know already, Australia and the US, Canada, Australia, and the US, those three countries consist of the three major migration destinations, transoceanic migration destinations. So it's really interesting, and it's really important to try to retell a story of a global story of migration, which that not only brings Canada and Greece together, but also brings Canada, Australia, maybe the US, and also Greece in a network scheme, in a scheme that permits us to tell more complete stories. So working on this archive, specifically working on Greeks in Canada in the HHF Greek Canadian archives, gives me the opportunity to focus on stories that not only provide a typical migration history, migration story, a migration experience of somebody who came, let's say, in Canada, and that's it, but also permits me to try to find those specific points or those behaviors that people encountered with, and those specific experiences that shaped their personality and their migration experience. Some of these stories that are emerging during our research are stories of exploitation that most probably even you have heard of, but they are not very well known, or they are not really they are being pushed back in order to be forgotten. So I don't want to go over time. I just want to thank you once again for your presence here, and I want to encourage you to participate in our program and in our study. It's as you already seen. We're conducting interviews. Both I have to mention this. Both via video recording, but also if you are feeling uncomfortable, via audio recording, and you have already seen the benefits of seeing somebody retelling their story. So please contact us if you yourselves or if somebody you know want to participate in this study and help us create an archive of Greeks in Canada that it's not just a static and rehearsed, let's say, migration history of people who came here, established association, and that's it. Thank you very much.
And before we hear from you, I would love to hear from you what you think. And I would just want to say a big thanks to Bill, Angelo, and Alexandros, because as you can tell, this can only be a team effort. This is not someone's single person's work. It's practically impossible, time-wise, money-wise. And of course, it's thanks to the Hellenic Heritage Foundation that's provided a significant amount to create the archives. But since we're here tonight, we would love to hear what you make of it, what you think about it, what's your sort of reactions to what you just heard. What would you like to see in this kind of project, in this kind of archive? So, any comments or questions you have in Greek or in English, obviously, feel free. Thank you.
Εγώ θα ήθελα αυτό να γινόταν πριν 10 χρόνια ή έστω και 5-6 χρόνια, γιατί η κοινότητα τα τελευταία 10 χρόνια έχει χάσει πάρα πολλούς ηλικιωμένους, δυστυχώς. Τώρα υπάρχουν όμως άλλοι που εσείς ξέρετε ονόματα, θα μπορούσατε να δώσετε, να τηλεφωνήσετε.
Και ο Βασίλης, ένας, που μπορεί να πει, ναι. Υπάρχουν αρκετοί που είναι δεύτερη γενιά, αλλά θα πρέπει να τους μιλήσουμε. Δεν είναι εδώ απόψε. Ο Βασίλης είναι ένας από αυτούς που είναι πολλά χρόνια εδώ και έχει γνώσεις. Τώρα δεν ξέρω ποιους άλλους που είναι εδώ. Αλλά θα πρέπει να τους μιλήσουμε, να δούμε αν εμείς, η κοινότητα έχει... εκδίδαμε χρόνια πριν τα yearbooks, που τα λέγαμε, τα αναμνηστικά λευκόματα. Τα έχουμε κρατήσει, δεν ξέρω αν ενδιαφέρεστε για αυτά. Ήθελετε μόνο συνεντεύξεις?
Όχι, είμαστε αρχείο και υπάρχει και υλικό που χρειάζεται. Είναι μόνο βίντεο ή online material υλικό, αλλά οπότε πολύ ευχαριστούς. Αν θέλετε να δωρήσετε μια σειρά από δημοσιεύσεις που δεν υπάρχουν αλλού, βεβαίως. Επίσης να πω ότι το αρχείο είναι για πάρα πολλά χρόνια. Δεν το κάνουμε για τα επόμενα 3-4-5 χρόνια. Οπότε, when we build something like this, we also think of generations and people many years, hopefully, after us. So we would love to interview people who are second or third generation here, because this, the interviews are a sort of snapshot. So people will say about, what they think, how they see themselves as Greek Canadians now. Imagine if someone watches this in 2050 and they say, oh, look, this is how people felt. This is how people spoke about this back in 2024, 25. So we're looking for people who are elderly, let's say, who are 60, 70, 80, 90 sometimes, thankfully, 100 in one case. Because there is an obvious urgency, that's why this is our first group. But we're not only looking to. This is a different project. People who are born here, as some of our colleagues we can tell you, they have a different story to tell, and they can say it even if they are 30, 40, 50 years old. It doesn't mean that. We don't believe that people, especially working for an archive, people have to get at 80 to tell the story. To become wise, yeah.
When are you leaving? Heading back?
One of us tomorrow, all three of us on Saturday, but we can come back.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is I'm with the HEPA Association here in Ottawa. Okay. And we started our own HEPA archives.
Wonderful.
And it's in downtown, where I have a whole room dedicated from HEPA across Canada. So it's the pictures from the 40s, 50s, 60s,
Yes,
all about a HEPA. So we did our own little archive project,
Mhm.
but focused on the category of the American Hellenic Education Progressive Association. So that's why I said if you're around, you could come downtown. I can open the door, you're going to walk
Yeah.
in, and you're going to go, here's a museum here of history and archives and collection. Second, as happens, what we did, I think it was just last year, we went to the Pier 21 Museum of Immigration, and we laid a plaque commemorating all the Greeks that have come through Pier 21. So we have the pictures and a duplicate of that plaque as well. That could probably be displayed also on your archive. So that's on the HEPA side. On my father's side, he was born in 1919, and he unfortunately passed away now. And he wrote everything down for me and on a dictaphone. So I have all his history and his writing, of which thanks to Olga here, I sent it to her and said, please do translation in English as well, so I could have this document. So on the other side, I have that as well, that you could hear his voice talking about his history. And he was also a Medal of Honor recipient in World War II. So there's a lot of history there as well.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
He immigrated to Canada
Yes.
in the
50s. So there's, yeah, that's why I said if you're around, I could pass you the copies, you could see the archives room. So there's a plethora, Greek word, of information and archives that I have at my disposal.
And we're not far, and we are planning to return too. So I mean, if there's more material like this, we'd love to hear about it. And again, if there are members of the community who are interested, of course, we'd like to achieve them as well. Yes.
So I'm not a Greek, I'm a non-Greek Canadian, but I'm interested, you have push factors, if you like, for Greeks to leave Greece, particularly after the 1940s. And what were at different times, the immigration policy in Canada has changed quite dramatically and makes the headlines these days too. How much was that a factor for the Greek individual who's looking at Australia, looking at America, looking at Europe, looking at Canada? Were they conscious of, we're wanted in Canada or we're not wanted in Canada when they're making their immigration choices? How do they end up in a place that, not today, but generally is not, climatically favorable from a Greek perspective?
I think that's for you.
So yeah, most of the people that we have interviewed knew nothing about Canada except that they had relatives here, or maybe in the best case that it was cold. Some didn't even know about that. So yeah, migration policies, of course, play a very important role. And during the 1970s, as we know, there was a shift in migration policy, Canadian migration policy, that focused on points and having experience in certain jobs or having knowledge of specific languages, etc. These changes in migration policies permitted more people to came, but me personally, what I think it's important, I think it's important to explain that people's decision most of the times is not affected by law, or when it is affected by law, it is being translated by those who decide to migrate. So what I'm trying to say is that while there were cases of people who, of course, many cases of people who followed the law and migrated to Canada legally, there were also cases of people who migrated illegally. And this is not just a factor of changed migration policy. This is just a factor of will. This gives us the opportunity to discuss what we call in history agency. Also talking about pull factors and push factors. So let's say that Canadian migration policy is a pull factor, but the terrible decade that Greece leaves behind in 1950s is also a push factor. Of course, this is a great factor, or it pushes people out of Greece. There is no doubt about that. But this has been already studied. We know that people left Greece because of the war, and we know that the experiences that Angel, for example, is studying were traumatic experiences that most of our interviewees, remembered until the very end of their lives. But again, push factors and pull factors do not tell the whole story. While, for example, in 1950s and 1960s, Greece was an economic miracle. At the very same time, more Greeks than ever left the country. So yeah, that's my input. That we're trying to broaden our understanding of migration, not just by following, let's say, schemes that have already been examined and introduced by research.
And if I may add, thanks, Alexander. The migration policy has an impact before 1940 as well, of course. So, for instance, this year is the 100 years since the 1924 change in migration policy in the United States. Well, this affected directly the Greeks who wanted to go to the United States but couldn't because of the quotas that were imposed. Therefore, the number of Greeks who come to Canada jumped, almost doubled. So we know in 1931 census, we have twice the number of Greeks that had in 1921. Part of the reason is because many of them could not go into the United States. Others, though, do. They come to the United States or they cross from the US to Canada. And that is why we're trying to get as much information as possible about the 1931 census, because it will show this in individual records, this sort of change in migration policy. And of course, in the 1940s, the Greek state again is actively encouraging people to migrate. So I remember seeing a document where the Minister of Labor of some other ministry in Greece goes to the first Canadian ambassador in Athens and tells him, can you change this quota you have, that only 4,000 Greeks can migrate per year, which they finally do. Canada does that in 1953. So, but there is an active emigration policy from the Greek state. So it matters a lot. But then, as historians, as Alex said, we have to look at people's will and decision making. How many people do you know about who jumped a ship and stayed, in this country? Several.
I don't know if you read the book We the Others by Tula Drimonis.
Yes.
Yeah. She talks about general allophones and immigration to Quebec, and she has a whole section on the Greeks as well.
Yes.
I just want to really thank you. I'm very impressed with your presentation and to see the strength. I mean, you, like you said, a team, because we first heard about York University collecting information a couple of years ago, remember? And oh, well, they're looking for material, but it only sounded like, oh, somebody had donated some material to York University and they wanted more stuff. So this is a really good presentation. It really informs and it shows how this is a very serious long-term project. And like we're really impressed with your presentation and the professionalism of it. I was just wondering if perhaps some of the Greek videos that you could put some English subtitles, because for the future, know, I mean, people, it'll be worthwhile.
Yes, we're planning to.
Yeah,
we're planning
sure.
to. It's just
I know,
more expensive and
yes,
time-consuming, but it's definitely something we have to do.
And I'll encourage my husband to be interviewed.
Yeah.
Because as he's a first generation.
Now, this is the video was mentioned this morning. This is the one.
Oh, you're already.
Would you like to ask something? Yeah.
I just think what is missing from our conversation is a big thank you for this country that welcome us as immigrants here and give us the opportunity to find our careers and to contribute to society and grow our families and so on. And each other man spoke about policies and stuff, but overall it ends up to the fact that this country welcome ourselves as immigrants and give us the opportunity to continue our life.
We'll be thinking a lot about this today. I mean, with Vasilis, Alexandros, and Angelo, because we were looking at the so-called, as they are cataloged, Polymenakos fronts. These are basically the documents of the Greek community of Toronto and of Polymenakos, the president, for many years president of the community. And they somehow ended up in the Library Archives Canada. And there you see how through their own archive, through their own, let's say, speeches, Polymenakos personally, but others, reflect on this change of, because this is from the mid-60s up until the 80s, a period of dramatic change in Canadian society, in immigration, in everything pretty much. So we've been thinking quite a lot about, how does that filter through the archives? And also, how does, Alexandros mentioned, for instance, how, this is what we call, sound grand and complicated transnational history. But it's basically something very simple. How does a history of one country reflect on the people who move from one country to another? How does homeland politics and society continues to affect and lives on? And what happens in that society, as in Angelo's project, continues to stay with people for the rest of their lives. Because you don't let go easily. If you see someone getting killed when you're 4 or 5, or when you hear something like that, you're going to be drowned in blood. So that's what we're trying to do, and of course keeping an eye in both places, or research in both places. So yeah, we're thinking a lot about how does this country change, and how does that one person's individual, but also community, or let's say institutional archive of the Greek community continues to generate interesting questions that we haven't had the chance to see before, because the documents are here.
It is an amazing research. It's a lot of survey to do. You're very courageous because you interview someone that says a small part of the whole story of 70 years or 80 years of their life. And so you don't want, well, in a way, you have already, can I say, some kind of treasure, but it's to be grateful to the whole life of this person in Canada and the contribution, that they have done, each one of them. It's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. That's why it makes every story unique. And we're not just attracted to the older generation. I'm sure everyone in this room has their own story, and their own story is worth something. So we encourage you to please think about the archive and your willingness to share the story.
How long does it last, the kingdom? How long?
An hour and a half to 3-4 hours.
3-4 hours.
With Angelo,
Let people speak and talk.
well, we try to guide them. Now, that's the thing. It's not a free flow interview. Tell us your story. We try to guide them. It's a complicated, and people do different things. But we're trying, and I think we're fairly consistent in that we don't give people a questionnaire. We don't go over 25 questions that when people get to the 3, okay, don't say anymore about that. Let's go to question number 4. No, we don't do that. That's a different style of or approach, let's say. But with Kula Lekas, for instance, Angela and I have interviewed her 4 times. Because we watch her interview, we want to go back and she wants to say more. Clearly she knows, there's not a huge amount of time left, but she also has to say very unique things. She tells us, I always say it in a very simple way. She talks about things that she remembers that we have only seen in black and white photographs. Like opening of St. George and Bond Street in Toronto. You know, she was there the day in 1937. St. George opened its doors in Toronto. She was there.
It's a living archive.
She's a living, many things, a living memory of, you know, we think she's probably the oldest Greek Canadian. Don't hold it.
What a shame we've lost 80 people this year. In
80 people.
Some of our older people.
Yeah,
The last
it's,
2 years, it's outdated.
Last 2 years.
Yeah, the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think we.
Probably more.
well, it's a losing battle. I mean, but
Yes.
at least we can give, we can fight. You know, I think, you know, with no one's going to win at the end, but at least we can do something to sort of, you know, make up for this.
Yeah, I may have missed something, but how accessible is that? If I go to the website, I can see everything. Or do I have to register? Do I have to?
You have to register as a researcher, so it's available to researchers and students.
Okay. Be researcher.
Yeah.
But it's simple. You know, you can register. It's not a huge firewall or something behind it.
What's a researcher? Like, how do you qualify yourself as a researcher?
We tried to keep it broad because we didn't want to restrict it to university or community college faculty because there are a lot of independent researchers. In some cases where it's ambiguous, I mean, we haven't really had any that are suspect. We have had people reach out, and in most cases we know them. We can find different ways to vet them.
It's a way of making sure that it's not, you know, it's not going to go, you know, on YouTube. Let's say that as far as we're concerned, you know, someone may want to record this and upload it, but it's not going to be us. So, and these ethical and legal issues, it's something that we have dealt with before we actually start this, because that's why there's a consent form. That's why there is an agreement with the Clara Thomas Archives at York University, where all our archives are part of it. Yes.
Yeah, I came late, so first of all, congratulations for what seems an incredible initiative. I'm seeing, from what I've heard, there's a lot of snapshots, you know, as part of your archives. But what type of publication, and you may have presented this earlier, what type of cyberasma are you pulling out of some of these snapshots? What type of larger threads, publications are coming out? And I'm thinking about things that are maybe contested or problematic, difficult parts of our history. That, you know, there was a reference to Andantes and politics. So what about, for instance, the Greek Canadian Communist movement, or for instance, you know, on the National Film Board has one. I'm sure we've all seen it on the Greek diaspora in Montreal, 1970s clip that's freely available.
80 goes to Sparta.
This is the one, and it has for me, it was a shocking scene of a huge salle, you know, a big room full of Greeks, Greek Canadians, and I thought, oh wow, this is very interesting. And then I realized they were all in support of the Hundak. It was a huge, strong right wing. So the different, you know, all the tricky bits of history that you might not want to talk about, but.
Well, we certainly do want to talk about it. And it's made the most difficult, interesting question comes towards the end. But we definitely want to be dealing with these aspects of so-called difficult, as you mentioned, or less well known. I think some of the conclusions are. I'm going to be very brief. That let's take not a dictatorship. We'll come to that, the dictatorship period. But I'll say one of the most interesting for me revelations, let's say, of this sort of work on the pre-1940 history of Greece in Toronto have to do with the realization that the Toronto anti-Greek riots of 1918, which some of you may know now, which Koulalekas, for instance, interestingly, when she was growing up in the 30s, didn't know about because no one taught her. And if you look at that generation of people, they just wanted to let it go. They didn't want their kids to know. They didn't want the next generation. And even, late President Polymenakos, in his sort of narratives again and again of the Greek history and Greeks who came to Canada, he doesn't mention it at all. But of course he could have, because that would be an argument for how, Canada needs to be more inclusive of its, Greek influence. But he doesn't. And there was this silence for almost 100 years about this very traumatic event. 12 shops were destroyed. People were, lost thousands of dollars at the time, which was a lot of money. And I realized that this was not just, sort of the misunderstanding of a French Canadian soldier, veteran soldier, who went into a Greek diner and was kicked out because he was drunk. There were deeper causes, and that had to do with Greece being neutral during World War I for most of the period until 1917, with many of Greeks in Toronto who came from the Ottoman Empire, and some of them had these stores, and they were called Turkish Greeks, because people couldn't realize, if you come from Turkey, you're Turk. And Turkish, of course, Turks are enemies to Canada. So they couldn't distinguish who's Greek from Turkey and who isn't. So all this had to do with a history of the place where people came from, but also conditions in Canada. And then the dictatorship, and it would be great if my colleagues tell you more about it, Bill, for instance, for sure, is the realization that there is this division among Greeks, and there is the history of different institutions in the Greek community with small c that play a divisive role. And because people take sides, newspapers take sides. Then there is a grassroots movement, as we call it, from below, that organizes against the dictatorship very quickly. So within a week of the dictatorship in April 21st, 1967, there's the first meeting in the basement of St. George in Toronto, where, the religious space, but the only community space, the main community space at the time, against the dictatorship. And that continues to build. So there is a dissertation by Chris Graffos on the anti-dictatorship movement in Toronto and Montreal. But there's also publications that we work on. I also found something interesting, and I'm going to stop here, is how the March 25th anniversary was commemorated in different parts of Canada, but especially in Toronto, over time. And what I found out is that Greeks from celebrating in a small theater, very few of them, only gradually, when they were allowed to do so, started parading in the city. So at the beginning, there was no parade. There was no, parade on the Danforth, let's say, on March 25th. That came later, only when Greeks were allowed to do so as a community, as people from a country that was an ally. So the Second World War, that's another, I think, quite interesting conclusion, changes a lot in the perception of Greeks in Canada here.
And we have come a long way with it. Right now we're working with Leo Kousakos, the senator, and Annie Petrakis, one of the MPs. In the Senate, we passed the second reading now of recognizing the month of March as the Hellenic Heritage Month in Canada. Yesterday, it just passed in Saskatchewan. I don't know if you're aware, February 21st, it passed that officially in Saskatchewan. Now the whole province, for the month of March, it's Greek Heritage Month, and everybody should celebrate it.
Yeah.
So that was just passed yesterday.
I have two things to say very quickly. I did write a piece on Hellenic Heritage Month on Platia, so another little plug for Platia. And I did want to say that we're historians. We don't shy away from the messiness. We love the nuance on the junta. I worked on the last HHF Presents podcast, and Sakis and I were on the episode that focused on the diaspora. So we delved into some of these issues, and again spoke plainly about the fact that there were these divisions and people did take sides, and we spoke specifically about who was supporting the junta and who stood up, the minority that stood up against it, so that it's remembered, and it's remembered accurately. Me and Sakis are moving in opposite directions in response to this project. So Sakis is moving backward, looking at that sort of first wave. of immigration. One of the things that I found really interesting are some of the most recent frictions. So again, I wrote up this piece. I keep plugging this stuff that Sonny Platia, but go to Platia. There's a lot of interesting things. I wrote this piece that dealt with the 2019 federal election, and John Candace, who you might remember, he was a longtime Liberal MP. He ran as an independent, and the Greek community did not stand up and support him. So he said in his oral history interview that Angelo and I conducted that his son, who was a scrutineer at one of the election sites, heard someone saying, "Mim psiphisis ton Elena," don't vote for the Greek. And his daughter heard something similar. And I thought that this was a real fascinating thing. And then we went into, again, John Candace's background, what John Candace says he sort of contributed for the Greek community, the way he stood up for Greek causes, and what the response was, and what that suggested about this sort of shifting, the way that diaspora is shifting. So to answer your question about some of the sort of through lines that we're seeing, I've become interested in this sort of question of diaspora politics in the present. What's happening right now as this sort of older generation that stories we're trying to preserve is starting to pass, and as this sort of younger generation, Gen X and millennials, are stepping into the leadership roles within these various Greek community organizations. What does that look like? Does the community itself change? What is the relationship with the church looking like moving forward? Is that something that's evolving? What does heritage actually mean for us? Does it just mean learning kalamatiano, learning how to bake some Greek desserts for Christmas, making a spanakopita, or is it something a little bit more robust? What is the engagement with history like? What is the engagement with other Greek diasporas like? These are some of the things that we're also thinking, but also what has this country given to us? One of the things that we've been finding is that there's this fascinating discourse on multiculturalism in the 60s and 70s that Greek community leaders are participating in, and they're using this language in order to justify their own community projects. We need a Hellenic Center. Why do we need a Hellenic Center? Because this is how we contribute to the mosaic. This is how we contribute to multiculturalism. These are some of the things that have been coming to mind for me, and other questions that I think have piqued Alex's curiosity about different migration routes. The fact that it isn't one-to-one all the time. It isn't, we left Greece because it was really bad. We didn't have any jobs. We didn't have any food. We lost family during the 40s, and we came to Canada for a better life. We worked hard, and we thrived, and now our kids are sort of successful professionals. The lines that we're seeing are much different. We have a lot of people who go to Australia, who go to Egypt, people who repatriate. And this is all part of the sort of global history that sort of Alex is focusing on. But the more stories we collect, the richer our history becomes. And this is one of the things that I really want to stress, and I'll stop talking now, but this is something that makes your stories all the more valuable.
No, there's no question that the politics of Greece kept the Greeks diaspora across the globe divided, and this is a negative for the Greek immigrants. And if there is anything negative that can be highlighted, is the fact that these politics continue with the immigrants locally, which is sad. And you maybe as historians, you could also include the effect of civil war in Greece after the Second World War. That's all I think of talking about right now.
Yes.
You mentioned the persecutions in 1918 in Toronto of the Greeks. Has the acceptance of the Greek immigrants in Canada, so over the past 100 years, has that been sort of a gradually progressive thing that's gone on continuously? Have there been dips and rises in it with, and if dips and rises, why were they less accepted or more accepted from time to time by the Canadian community?
I don't know. I'm a very recent immigrant, so I can only talk about sort of the history of this. I would say undoubtedly there's been ups and downs, but overall this is an upward curve. But then what is the curve? Where is it going? what is the level of acceptance, let's say, because this is a difficult way to classify people's, as groups. Their level of acceptance, it can also be a different level itself. There's this there's a state approach, let's say, but then there's sort of more individual approach that people encounter when they speak very highly, for instance, of their in many cases of people like Angelo's grandmother who came as domestic workers. All 12,000 of them. 12,000 women around also were trained to come to this country as domestic workers.
When was that? When was that?
From the 50s to the 70s. Typically with the obligation to stay for 1 year with a family that provided them with employment. And in many cases, they speak of the difficulties they face, but in others, they speak of very highly of the families in which they worked. So were they accepted when they were told in the bus, for instance, at least in Toronto, to shut up and don't speak Greek? But at the same time, they were welcomed at the other level for what they were doing, for who they were in the families. They provided them, with support in many cases, to begin to start their lives. And in many cases, to bring their husbands from Greece. So it's not what happens before the war, let's say, where the men bring the women, typically. In many cases in Canada, as some of you probably know anyway, it's women who bring the men.
The other reason for the immigrants not being united or more cooperative between themselves is the division of so-called in Greek topikismos. They feel closer to the people that they are from the same island or the same area of Greece, and this continues, I think, since 300-400 years before Christ, for the war that we learned between Athens and Sparta and so on, and it continues to this day. It's something I find negative.
But it's not a Greek thing,
Maybe not.
There are many civil wars over time, and also this topikismos, the sort of, the Italians have a word for it, for instance. They call it campanilismo. It's very similar, where you fight for your own village only, and you hate the village next to you, to yours. So it's common. Yes.
You mentioned that you also include Greek Cypriots in your research.
We do.
So the question is, what was the predominant reason for Greek Cypriots migrating to Canada? Was it the Turkish invasion?
Yeah, the Turkish invasion.
Was it before that? Was there significant immigration?
Well, our colleague is not here, Theo Xenofondos, our Greek Cypriot Canadian researcher, but he's could probably tell us that before 1974, there's very few Canadians, Cypriots who come to Canada. The large majority come to Toronto and Mississauga, at least, near where we live. They come after 1974 because of the invasion.
Kitchener. In Kitchener.
And Kitchener,
area.
And Kitchener, yeah, that's right.
Okay, I think
we have one more question.
Questions? One more question?
Yeah,
Last
so
question?
this could go on forever.
Then we
We'll
can,
after it's over. No, but you mentioned you also capturing the newer Greek waves. So this is a bit anecdotal. I'm on the parent guardian, so we're just the one that's of the Greek school, and it's fascinating where the new energy is coming from. It's from Greeks, from as we call them Greeks, who have come as economic migrants of the Greek crisis era. Or a different kind of migrant as well. They meet all the points requirements of the modern day Canadian immigration, etc. But they're serving to reinvigorate in some sectors bits that were over time, as you know, generationally, elements of Hellenism can get lost if they were diluted, especially language. Are you capturing some of these dynamics?
Not yet, but I think we should. Yeah. But this would be a different part of the archives, for sure. Yeah, but it's important. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was
Thank you,
really,
ma'am.
really good.